The lighthouse stood like a forgotten sentinel at the edge of Villa Maresia, its paint peeling in strips that curled like old parchment, revealing layers of rust and salt-worn stone beneath. It had been decommissioned 15 years ago, when the town installed automated beacons along the harbor, but Lena Martinez still came here every day. Not because anyone paid her to. The municipality had long stopped caring about the crumbling structure, but because within these walls, she was invisible in the way she chose to be, rather than the way the world demanded. She climbed the spiral staircase slowly, her hand trailing along the cool metal railing, counting the steps as she always did. 143. The number had become a meditation, a rhythm that steadied her breathing and quieted the voices that sometimes echoed in her mind. Voices from the marketplace, from the beach, from passing strangers who thought she couldn't hear their whispered assessments of her body, her worth, her right to exist in public spaces without shame. At the top, the lantern room offered a 360-degree view of the coastline. To the north, the town sprawled in pastel-colored buildings that cascaded down the hillside like a waterfall of coral, mint, and cream. To the south, endless ocean stretched toward a horizon that blurred sea and sky into a single breath of blue. This was Lena's kingdom, this chamber of glass and solitude where she cataloged weather patterns, sketched seabirds, and wrote poetry she would never show anyone. Today, she was supposed to be happy, or at least pretend to be. The Festival of Tides was beginning in town, an annual celebration that transformed Villa Maresia into a carnival of music, dancing, and elaborate costumes. From her vantage point, Lena could see the colored banners strung between buildings, could hear the distant pulse of drums beginning their call. 5 years ago, she would have gone. She would have worn her best dress, braided flowers into her dark hair, and hoped, foolishly, desperately, that someone might ask her to dance. But that was before she understood how the world worked, before she learned that in Villa Maresia, beauty was currency, and she was bankrupt. Her journal lay open on the small wooden table she'd salvaged from the beach. The page was blank, except for a single line she'd written that morning. What is the sound of a heart breaking underwater? She didn't know why she'd written it. The words had simply appeared, as if someone else had guided her pen. A knock on the lighthouse door shattered her reverie. Lena's heart stuttered. No one came here. No one except, "Lena, I know you're up there." The voice was bright, insistent, unmistakably belonging to her younger cousin, Sophia. "You can't hide forever." Lena closed her journal and made her way down the stairs, each step heavier than the climb up. Sophia stood in the doorway, radiant in a turquoise dress that made her look like she'd been carved from the ocean itself. At 19, she embodied everything Villa Maresia celebrated. Slim, graceful, with honey-colored skin that seemed to glow from within. "You're not seriously planning to stay here during the festival," Sophia said, not as a question, but as an indictment. "I have work to do," Lena replied, gesturing vaguely at the lighthouse as if its maintenance was a legitimate excuse. "Lena." Sophia's voice softened, and somehow that was worse than judgment. "Marco will be there. He's been asking about you." The name hit Lena like a wave she hadn't seen coming. Marco Velasquez, the fisherman with hands weathered by rope and sun, who smiled at everyone with the same easy warmth, who had once, 3 years ago at a midnight bonfire, sat beside her and talked about the constellations he used to navigate. She'd fallen in love with him in that moment, or perhaps she'd been falling all along, and that was simply when she'd admitted it to herself. "Marco asks about everyone," Lena said carefully, arranging her face into something approximating indifference. "He's kind. He's single," Sophia countered, her eyes glinting with matchmaker's zeal. "And I'm what?" Lena heard the edge in her own voice, sharp enough to cut. Sophia faltered. "You're wonderful. You're smart and talented, and you deserve—" "Please don't." Lena held up a hand. "I'll come to the festival. Just give me an hour." Relief flooded Sophia's face. She kissed Lena's cheek and disappeared down the path in a swirl of turquoise, leaving behind the scent of jasmine and the weight of expectations Lena knew she couldn't meet. The beach was transformed. Paper lanterns swayed from poles driven into the sand, casting pools of amber and crimson light across the crowd. Musicians played on a makeshift stage, their guitars and drums weaving rhythms that made even the waves seem to dance in time. The air smelled of grilled fish cinnamon pastries, and salt spray. Lena stood at the periphery, her purple dress, the one she'd bought 2 years ago and never worn, feeling simultaneously too tight and too loose, as if it belonged to someone else. She'd tried. She'd braided her thick black hair, applied lipstick the color of wine, even worn the silver earrings her grandmother had left her. But standing here, watching the beautiful people of Villa Marizia spin and laugh and glow with the confidence of those who'd never questioned their right to be seen, she felt like an imposter at her own life. Then she saw him. Marco stood near the bonfire, his white shirt open at the collar, his dark hair catching the light. He was laughing at something, his head thrown back in genuine amusement, and Lena's heart performed its usual acrobatics, hope and longing, and the painful certainty that this was all she'd ever have. Observation from a distance, love as spectator sport. She was about to retreat to the shadows when Marco's gaze swept across the crowd and landed on her. For a moment, one breathless, impossible moment, she thought she saw recognition, maybe even pleasure. He raised his hand as if to wave. But then someone stepped into his line of sight. Isabella Cortez was everything Lena was not. Willowy and elegant, with golden hair that cascaded down her back like captured sunlight. She wore a dress the color of seafoam, cut to reveal shoulders and collarbones that could have been sculpted by Renaissance masters. When she touched Marco's arm, claiming his attention, the gesture was possessive, familiar. The town's mayor stepped onto the stage, his voice booming through a crackling microphone. "Friends, before we continue our celebration, I have wonderful news to share." Lena's stomach dropped. "Marco Velasquez and Isabella Cortez have honored us with an announcement." The mayor beamed. "They're engaged to be married." The crowd erupted in cheers. Marco pulled Isabella close, and she tilted her face up for a kiss that seemed choreographed for maximum visibility. Lena watched his hands, those same hands that had pointed out Orion's belt to her years ago, cradle Isabella's perfect face, and something inside her shattered so completely that she wondered why no one heard the sound. Sophia appeared at her elbow, face stricken. "Lena, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't." But Lena was already moving, pushing through the crowd, desperate for air that didn't smell like celebration and loss. She heard her name called, Sophia, maybe others, but she didn't stop until her feet hit wet sand and the music faded to a distant pulse. The ocean stretched before her, vast and indifferent. Lena walked into the shallows, letting the cold water shock her system, welcoming the numbness spreading up her legs. The moon hung low and full, painting a silver path across the waves like an invitation to somewhere else. Anywhere else. Tears came then, hot against her salt-sprayed cheeks. She'd been a fool. Worse than a fool. She'd been hope personified. That most pathetic of creatures who believed beauty could be found in anything other than what the world insisted it should be. "Why?" she whispered to the ocean, her voice breaking. "Why am I not enough?" The tears fell faster now, and where they hit the water, something strange happened. The ocean began to glow, faint phosphorescence that spread in ripples from where her sorrow touched the sea. Lena stumbled back, fear cutting through grief, but the light intensified, forming patterns too deliberate to be natural. Then the water before her erupted. A figure rose from the depths, and Lena's scream caught in her throat as her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. He was tall, impossibly tall, his torso humanoid, but his skin shimmering with scales that shifted between silver and deep blue. Where his legs should have been, a powerful tail emerged, ending in translucent fins that caught the moonlight like stained glass. His face was angular, beautiful in a way that seemed almost painful to witness, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hair that moved as if still underwater despite the air. A merman. No, a triton. Her mind supplied from half-remembered fairy tales. "You called," he said, his voice resonant and strange, like music played through water. "Your tears carried such weight, such luminosity." He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. "Tell me, weeping one, what is your name?" Lena opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. This couldn't be real. She'd fallen, hit her head, was drowning and hallucinating. "I am Narian," the creature continued, moving closer with an effortless grace that made the water itself seem to bow. "Once of the 7th house of Atlantida, now of nowhere. His eyes, those impossible eyes, fixed on her face. And you are the first human in 300 years whose soul I've been able to see. My soul? Lena finally managed. It shines, Nerian said simply, reaching out a webbed hand as if to touch something invisible around her. Like a beacon, beautiful beyond comprehension. He paused, his expression shifting to something like confusion. Why do you cry, Keeper of Light? What darkness could touch someone who burns so bright? And despite everything, the impossibility, the fear, the sheer absurdity, Lena laughed. It was a broken sound, half sob, but genuine, because here, at the end of the worst night of her life, a mythical creature was calling her beautiful. Not her face, not her body, her soul. You can't be real, she whispered. Nerian smiled then, and it transformed his alien features into something almost heartbreaking. Reality is overrated, but pain is always real. He extended his hand fully. Tell me your name, luminous one, and tell me who made you believe you were anything less than extraordinary. Lena looked at that outstretched hand, webbed and strange and somehow perfect, and made a choice. She didn't know if this was madness, magic, or some elaborate breakdown, and in that moment, she didn't care. Lena, she said, placing her hand in his. My name is Lena Martinez, and I think I need to learn how to see what you see. The ocean glowed brighter around them, and somewhere behind her the festival continued, a world of surfaces and mirrors where she'd never quite belonged. But here, in the shallows with a banished Triton and the taste of salt and possibility on her lips, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The meetings became ritual. Every night when the moon rose high enough to silver the waves, Lena would leave the lighthouse and walk to the hidden cove north of Villa Maricia, a crescent of sand sheltered by jagged rocks that the townspeople avoided, claiming the currents were treacherous. She knew better now. The currents weren't dangerous. They were guarded. Nerion would be waiting, sometimes floating in the shallows, sometimes perched on the black rocks with his tail coiled beneath him like a serpent of liquid mercury. In the 3 weeks since their first meeting, Lena had learned things that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the world. Atlantida was real, a vast kingdom in the deep trenches where sunlight never reached, illuminated instead by bioluminescent gardens and cities carved from volcanic glass. The Tritons who lived there had evolved beyond human constraints, developing gills, pressure-resistant bodies, and a culture that prized physical perfection above all else. They were beautiful, Nerian explained, but it was a cold beauty, flawless, but empty. We spent so long perfecting the exterior that we forgot to cultivate the interior, he'd told her on their 5th night together, his voice carrying the weight of exile. I was banished because I questioned this, because I suggested that a scarred warrior might have more value than a perfect courtier, because I looked at humans, messy, mortal, imperfect humans, and saw something we'd lost. What did you see? Lena had asked. Souls on fire, he'd answered simply. Yours most of all. Tonight, Nerian was teaching her to swim properly, not the clumsy dog paddle she'd learned as a child, but the way ocean creatures moved, in harmony with the current, rather than fighting against it. Your body knows, he insisted, circling her in the waist-deep water. You're thinking with your fear instead of your instinct. Feel the pull of the tide. Let it guide you. Easy for you to say, Lena muttered, spitting out salt water. You were born to this, and you were born to your element, the earth, the air, the in-between spaces. He moved closer, his hand finding hers beneath the surface. Even after 3 weeks, his touch still sent electricity through her nerves. But tonight, you are a guest in my world. Trust it. Trust yourself. Lena took a breath and dove. This time, instead of flailing, she let her body go loose, felt the current catch her like invisible hands. She kicked, not frantically, but with purpose, and suddenly she was gliding, the water parting around her like silk. When she surfaced, gasping and grinning, Nerion's face held something she was learning to recognize. Pride. There, he said softly. Now you're swimming like someone who belongs. They floated together as the moon climbed higher, and Nerion told her about the deep ocean, the whale songs that carried for hundreds of miles, the volcanic vents where strange life bloomed in the dark, the trenches so deep that even Tritons feared them. Lena, in turn, told him about books and music, about the way autumn leaves changed color, about hot chocolate and the smell of rain on dry earth. "Don't you miss it?" she asked. "Atlantida. You're home." Nerion was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I miss what I thought it was, but the reality, a place where my brother was exiled to the kelp farms because a shark attack left scars on his face, where my sister's daughter was deemed unsuitable for presentation because she was born with a crooked spine, even though her mind is the sharpest in 3 generations." His jaw tightened. "No, I don't miss a home that measures worth by appearance alone." Lena's throat constricted. "That sounds familiar." "Yes." He turned to her, those storm-gray eyes seeming to see through skin and bone to something deeper. "Which is why I don't understand how they cannot see what you are. How are humans so blind?" "Not blind," Lena said quietly. "Just trained. We're taught from birth what beauty looks like. And I don't look like that." "You look like you," Nerion said with such conviction that Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "You look like someone who carries kindness in her bones, like someone whose laughter could heal wounds, like someone I would cross oceans to know." Before Lena could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her palm. She gasped, pulling her hand from the water to find a deep gash from a hidden shell, blood welling dark against her pale skin. "Let me see," Nerion said, but Lena was already pressing her other hand over the wound, instinct taking over. Heat bloomed beneath her fingers, not painful, but warm and bright, like sunlight concentrated to a point. When she lifted her hand seconds later, the gash was gone. Not healed, gone, as if it had never existed. Nerion stared at her unmarked palm, then at her face. "You didn't know," he said, wonder threading through his words. "You have the gift, and you didn't even know." "What gift?" "The healing touch. Rare even in Atlantida, unheard of in humans." He caught her hand gently, examining it. "Your soul doesn't just shine, Lena. It mends. This is why you called to me that night, why your tears had weight. You're a healer of spirit." And the magic recognized itself. The discovery changed everything. 2 days later, Lena was in the marketplace buying supplies when she heard screaming. A crowd had gathered near the fish stalls where a young boy, no more than 8, lay writhing on the ground, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. His mother knelt beside him, her face twisted in panic. "The cart rolled over him," someone explained. "His leg is shattered." Lena pushed through the crowd before she could think better of it. The boy's eyes were wide with shock and pain, his breathing rapid and shallow. Without hesitation, she placed her hands on his leg. The heat came immediately, stronger than before, flowing from her core through her arms and into the broken bones beneath her palms. She felt rather than saw the fragments knitting together, the torn tissue reconnecting, the pain dissipating like mist. The boy's breathing steadied, his eyes cleared. When Lena lifted her hands, his leg was whole. The marketplace went silent. Then someone whispered, "Miracle." The word spread like fire. "Milagro, milagro." And suddenly everyone was pressing closer, asking questions, reaching for her. Lena fled, but the damage was done. By nightfall, people were appearing at the lighthouse. A woman with arthritis, a man with a festering wound, a teenage girl with chronic headaches. Lena helped them all, unable to turn away suffering when she had the power to end it. Each healing left her exhausted but somehow more solid, as if using the gift anchored her more firmly to reality. Sophia appeared on the 3rd day of the parade of afflicted, her expression torn between awe and concern. "The whole town is talking about you. They're calling you La Sanadora, the healer." She paused. "Marco came by the house asking about you." Lena's hands stilled over the herbs she was grinding. "What did he want?" "He didn't say. But Lena," Sophia's voice dropped. "His wedding is in 2 weeks. Be careful." The warning proved prescient. Marco appeared at the lighthouse the next evening, just as Lena was preparing to leave for her meeting with Nerion. He looked haggard, his usual easy smile absent. "It's true then," he said without preamble. "You can heal people." "Yes." Lena kept her voice neutral, though her heart was hammering. "How long have you been able to do this? Does it matter?" Marco ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from late-night conversations years ago, when he was troubled. "Everything matters now. Lena, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I made a mistake. The world tilted slightly. What? Isabella. The engagement. It was... Her father owns the largest fishing fleet in the region. My boat was failing. My crew threatening to leave. He offered a merger, but only if... Marco's voice dropped. Only if I married his daughter. I thought I could do it. I thought beauty and security would be enough, but I was wrong. Lena felt something cold settle in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because I should have seen you, Marco said, stepping closer. All those nights we talked, the way you listened, the way you understood. I should have realized what I had, but I was blind. And now everyone sees what you are, and I... Stop. Lena's voice cut like a blade. You don't see me, Marco. You see La Sanadora. You see someone suddenly valuable because she can offer something useful. That's not the same thing. That's not fair, isn't it? Lena felt anger rising, clean and clarifying. 3 weeks ago, I was invisible to you. Now I'm interesting because the town thinks I'm special. But I haven't changed, Marco. I'm the same person I was at that bonfire 3 years ago. The same person who loved you then and cried over you at the festival. The difference is that now I know my worth doesn't come from being seen by you. She walked past him, toward the door. Where are you going? Marco called after her. Somewhere I'm wanted, Lena said, and meant it. She found Nerion in their cove, but something was wrong. He was slumped against the rocks, his breathing labored, the scales on his tail dulled to ash gray. Nerion! Lena splashed through the shallows, her earlier anger forgotten. What's wrong? The shallow water, he managed, his voice strained. I've stayed too long in it. My body is meant for deep pressure, cold temperatures. Up here I'm weakening. Horror flooded through her. How long? A month, perhaps less. He tried to smile. Worth it, though. To know you. No. Lena pressed her hands to his chest, calling on the healing warmth. It came, but differently than before. She could feel his alien physiology resisting, the magic unsure how to mend something so different from human. I won't let you die. We'll find a way. There is no way, Nerion said gently. My people have sent a summons. Return to Atlantida or face execution as a traitor. They arrive with the next new moon. 5 days. Either way, Lena, our time is ending. Tears streamed down Lena's face, but these weren't the hopeless tears that had called him from the deep. These were tears of rage against a universe that would finally give her someone who saw her truly, only to tear him away. Then we have 5 days, she said fiercely, and I'm not wasting them grieving what hasn't happened yet. That night, they didn't speak of endings. Instead, Nerion showed her how to float on her back and read the stars, the same constellations he'd used to navigate before his exile. Lena taught him the lyrics to her favorite song, watching his face transform with wonder at the poetry in the verses. They talked until dawn began to gray the horizon, about everything and nothing, storing up moments against the coming silence. As the sun rose, painting the ocean in shades of rose and gold, Nerion touched her face with careful reverence. Whatever happens, know this. You changed me, made me believe that perhaps all beings, human or Triton, beautiful or broken, deserve to be seen for what they are. Lena kissed his palm, tasting salt and the bittersweet flavor of borrowed time. You gave me back myself, she whispered. That's worth any ending. But as she walked back to the lighthouse, passing early morning fishermen, who now nodded respectfully instead of looking through her, Lena made a decision. She wouldn't accept this ending. She would find a way to save Nerion, even if it meant diving into the depths of Atlantida itself, even if it meant challenging a kingdom that had spent millennia perfecting cruelty dressed as beauty. The healing gift pulsed in her veins like a second heartbeat, and for the first time since discovering it, Lena understood its true purpose. It wasn't just for mending flesh, it was for mending worlds. The new moon rose invisible over Villa Mauritia, an absence of light that made the stars burn brighter in compensation. Lena stood at the edge of the cove, her heart a war drum in her chest, watching the water for signs of what she knew was coming. They arrived like a nightmare given form. The ocean began to churn, phosphorescence spiraling up from the depths in columns of cold blue fire. 6 figures broke the surface in perfect synchronization. Triton warriors, their bodies encased in armor made from black coral and shark teeth, their faces hidden behind helmets shaped like the skulls of deep-sea predators. They moved with mechanical precision, forming a semicircle around the cove as a 7th figure emerged. This one wore no helmet. He didn't need to. King Thalasor of Atlantida was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, all sharp edges and cold perfection. His scales were pure white, shot through with veins of silver, his eyes chips of Arctic ice. A crown of twisted pearl and bone sat upon his head, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ocean trenches. Nerion, son of the seventh house, you have been summoned to answer for your crimes against the realm. The king's gaze flicked dismissively over Lena. Step away from the human, traitor. Your judgment awaits. Nerion rose from the shallows where he'd been resting, gathering what remained of his strength. In the days since the summons, his condition had deteriorated rapidly, his tail now mottled with patches of dying tissue. His breathing labored even in water, but his voice remained steady. I will not return, father. The word, father, hit Lena like a physical blow. She turned to Nerion, betrayal and confusion warring in her chest. You're the prince? Was, Nerion corrected softly. I abdicated that title when I refused to sentence my brother to exile, when I questioned whether our definition of perfection was worth the cost. He looked back at Thalasor. I found something here worth more than a throne, worth more than immortality itself. You found weakness, Thalasor spat. You found humans, those brief, chaotic creatures who age and wither and die, who waste their potential on emotions and sentiment. You have disgraced your bloodline, Nerion. But I am not without mercy. Return now. Accept your punishment. And you may yet live out your centuries in the kelp farms, forgotten but breathing. And if I refuse, then you die here, in these shallow waters, gasping like the pathetic thing you've become. The king's eyes were empty of anything resembling love. Choose. Lena stepped forward before she could stop herself, her voice ringing clear across the cove. I have a counteroffer. The king's attention shifted to her, and it was like being examined by something vast and indifferent. A glacier, perhaps, or the heat death of the universe. The human speaks. How quaint. I am Lena Martinez, she said, forcing her voice not to shake. And I am a healer. I've heard of the curse that afflicts your people, the coldness, the inability to feel true emotion. I can cure it. For the first time, something flickered in Thalasor's expression. Impossible. The glaciation curse has existed for 3,000 years, since our people chose perfection over passion. No magic has ever broken it. Because you've never had a healer like me. Lena raised her hands, and the warmth that had been building in her core since the moment the warriors arrived surged to the surface. Her palms glowed with golden light, not the subtle heat of mending a wound, but something vast and ancient, a power that had been sleeping in her bloodline since before recorded history. I am a soul weaver, the first in a millennium, and I offer you a bargain. Let Nerion go free, and I will come to Atlantida. I will teach your people to feel again. The warriors shifted, their formation breaking slightly. Even through their helmets, Lena could sense their hunger, the desperate need of those who'd lived so long in emotional winter that they'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Thalasor's eyes narrowed. And why would a human sacrifice herself for a traitor? What could you possibly gain? Love, Lena said simply. The thing your kingdom forgot how to value. The thing that makes us more than just beautiful shells. I won't let Nerion die for teaching me that lesson. Lena, no. Nerion started, but she silenced him with a look. I'm not asking your permission, she said gently. I'm making a choice. The first truly free choice of my life. Thalasor studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he smiled, and it was a terrible thing, that smile, empty of humor or warmth. Very well, Soul Weaver. I accept your bargain. You will come to Atlantida and attempt your cure. If you succeed, Nerion goes free. If you fail, he gestured, and one of the warriors produced a sphere of living water, contained within itself, swirling with trapped currents. You will be bound to the deep forever, transformed into one of us, stripped of your precious humanity, and Nerion will watch you become the very thing he claims to despise. That's not a fair bargain, Nerion protested, but Lena was already nodding. I accept. Then we leave now. Thalasor extended a webbed hand toward her. The tide waits for no one, not even those who fancy themselves saviors. Lena turned to Nerion, memorizing his face, the angle of his jaw, the storm cloud eyes, the way desperation and pride warred in his expression. She kissed him once, tasting salt and goodbye and the promise of something that might never be. "Trust me," she whispered against his lips. "I know what I'm doing." "I don't," Nerion said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to watch you drown." "Then don't watch," Lena said. "Wait, and have faith that love is stronger than any curse." Before he could respond, she took Thalassor's hand. The king pulled her into the water, and the world exploded into cold and pressure, and the sensation of being unmade at the molecular level. The descent was agony. Lena's lungs screamed for air as they plunged deeper, the pressure increasing with every fathom. Just when she thought her chest would collapse, one of the warriors pressed something to her lips, a living organism, all tentacles and bioluminescence, and forced it down her throat. She gagged, but the thing latched onto her trachea, and suddenly she could breathe. Not air, water, cold and thick and wrong, but her body accepted it, adapted to it, her human form becoming something other. They descended for what felt like hours, past layers of ocean life Lena had never imagined. Schools of fish that glowed like constellations, jellyfish the size of houses trailing tentacles of living lightning, creatures so alien they defied classification, existing in forms that hurt to perceive. Then the lights of Atlantida appeared below. The kingdom was impossibly vast, sprawling across the ocean floor like a nightmare of beauty. Towers carved from black volcanic glass spiraled upward, connected by bridges of living coral. Gardens of bioluminescent kelp swayed in currents channeled through crystal tubes. Everywhere, tritons moved in choreographed perfection, their bodies flawless, their movements synchronized, their faces uniformly empty. They brought her to the palace, a structure so massive it created its own currents. Walls of mother of pearl inlaid with designs that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Inside, the throne room was a cathedral of cold beauty. Hundreds of tritons lined the walls, their faces all wearing the same expression, beautiful, empty curiosity. Thalassor ascended to his throne, the water itself seeming to bow around him. "Citizens of Atlantida," he announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "This human claims she can break the glaciation curse. She has 3 days to prove her worth. If she succeeds, she earns her freedom and that of the traitor Nerion. If she fails," he gestured to the sphere of living water, now mounted on a pedestal beside his throne, "she becomes one of us forever." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not words, but a sound like wind through a graveyard, hollow, interested but incapable of caring. Lena floated in the center of the chamber, her borrowed gills working overtime, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 days. She had 3 days to heal an entire civilization's worth of emotional damage, or lose everything, her humanity, her freedom, any chance of a life with Nerion. "No pressure. I'll need access to your people," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Not just the nobility. Everyone. Warriors, farmers, the ones you've exiled to the kelp farms. If I'm going to heal the curse, I need to understand how it manifests in all its forms." Thalassor waved a dismissive hand. "You may go where you wish. Speak to whom you choose. My daughter, Princess Thessaly, will serve as your guide and guard." A young Triton emerged from the crowd, barely more than a girl, her scales the pale blue of shallow water, her eyes holding more life than any other in the chamber. When she looked at Lena, something flickered in her gaze. Hope, perhaps, or hunger. "Come," Thessaly said softly. "I'll show you the city. But first you should know, the curse isn't just about inability to feel, it's about forgetting we ever could." The next 3 days were a crucible. Thessaly took Lena through every layer of Atlantean society, and everywhere, Lena found the same devastating pattern. The Tritons weren't cruel exactly. They simply didn't comprehend why cruelty mattered. They had optimized their existence to the point of meaninglessness. In the warrior barracks, she met soldiers who trained without purpose beyond perfection, who couldn't remember why they fought or what they protected. In the kelp farms, she found Nerion's scarred brother, a Triton named Kiros who moved through his days like a ghost, unable to recall what it felt like to be angry about his exile. But it was in the deepest levels, where the oldest Tritons dwelled, that Lena found the key. An ancient female, her scales gone translucent with age, sat alone in a chamber of absolute darkness. Her name was Morghenus, and she had been alive when the curse was cast. "We chose it," Morghenus whispered, her voice like distant whale song. 3,000 years ago, we were like you, passionate, messy, alive, but passion led to war. Love led to heartbreak. Joy was always followed by sorrow, so our greatest mages crafted a spell to remove the pain. They called it the glaciation, the freezing of the heart. She laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "We thought we could keep the good feelings and discard the bad. We didn't understand that you cannot have one without the other, that to feel joy, you must risk sorrow, that love only matters because we can lose it." "How do I break it?" Lena asked desperately. Time was running out. "You can't," Morghenus said. "Not alone. The curse is self-sustaining. It feeds on the very emptiness it creates. To break it, you would need—" She paused, her clouded eyes fixing on Lena with sudden clarity. "You would need someone willing to feel everything. All the accumulated pain and joy and loss of 3,000 years, channeled through a single soul. It would destroy a normal person. But a soul weaver—" Her ancient hand found Lena's. "You might survive it. Might." Lena's blood turned to ice. "And if I don't? Then you die, and the curse remains, and Atlantida continues its slow death into perfect, meaningless eternity." The third day dawned, or whatever passed for dawn in the eternal twilight of the deep. Lena was brought back to the throne room, where Thalassor waited with his court, Thessaly at his side, and the sphere of transformation pulsing with anticipation. "Well, Soul Weaver?" The king's voice held a note of satisfaction. "Have you learned the futility of your quest? Will you accept transformation peacefully, or must we force it?" Lena looked at the assembled Tritons, hundreds of beautiful empty faces, watching her with the emotional investment of people observing clouds. She thought of Nerion, waiting in the shallows above, dying slowly. She thought of Villa Maricia, and the lighthouse, and the person she'd been before, small and scared and convinced of her own worthlessness. She thought of what it meant to be brave. "I know how to break the curse," she said clearly, "but it requires your consent, King Thalassor, and I don't think you'll give it." The king's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The glaciation curse is powered by collective denial. Every Triton who chooses emotional safety over emotional truth strengthens it. To break it, I need to channel all that suppressed feeling through myself, process it, and release it back to your people healed. But," she met his gaze steadily, "it starts with you. The king must be the first to feel again. And feeling means confronting everything you've buried for millennia. Every loss, every regret, every moment of love you denied." "Impossible," Thalassor said, but his voice wavered. "You're afraid," Lena said softly. "That's why you exiled Nerion, because he reminded you of what you gave up, because he looked at you and saw not a perfect king, but a father who chose power over his children, who let his son be scarred and exiled rather than admit that love matters more than beauty." "Silence. You had a queen once," Lena continued, the knowledge flowing into her from Morghenus's memories. "Nerion's mother. She died in childbirth with Thessaly, and you loved her so much that the grief nearly destroyed you. So you were the first to accept the glaciation. You froze your heart to escape the pain, and in doing so, you froze your entire kingdom." Thalassor rose from his throne, his face a mask of rage that couldn't quite form because he'd forgotten how to feel it fully. "You know nothing. Then let me show you." Lena extended her hands, and they blazed with golden light so bright it illuminated the entire chamber. "Let me carry your pain for you. Let me prove that love, real, messy, complicated love, is worth any suffering, that your wife's memory deserves more than the erasure of forgetting, that your children deserved a father who could feel." For a long moment Thalassor stood frozen, the emptiness in his eyes warring with something deeper, older, desperately trying to resurface. Then, slowly, he descended from his throne and placed his hands in Lena's. The world detonated. 3,000 years of suppressed emotion slammed into Lena like a tsunami. She felt everything. Every heartbreak, every joy, every loss and triumph and mundane moment of connection that the Tritons had denied themselves. She felt Thalassor's love for his dead queen, so vast it could drown worlds. She felt Kairos's rage at his exile. Thessaly's longing for a father who could see her, Nerion's desperate hope that perhaps beauty could be redefined. She felt the weight of an entire civilization that had chosen perfection over life, and she understood, finally, why they'd made that choice. Because feeling hurt, because love was terrifying, because being vulnerable meant risking destruction, but it also meant being alive. Lena's body convulsed, her borrowed gills unable to process the sheer volume of emotion channeling through her. She was dimly aware of screaming, hers, maybe, or perhaps the collective cry of every Triton as the curse shattered, and feeling flooded back into the vacuum it left behind. She was dying. She could feel it, her human form unable to contain this much raw experience, her soul stretching to accommodate the weight of millennia until it threatened to tear apart entirely. But she didn't let go. Instead, she healed. She took every bitter memory and found the love within it, every loss, and located the beauty it had shielded. She wove the pain and joy together into something whole, something true, and then she gave it back, poured it into Thalasor first, then let it ripple outward through every Triton in the chamber, through the palace, through the city, through the entire kingdom in an ever-expanding wave of restored humanity. When it was done, Lena collapsed. She came back to consciousness slowly, aware first of softness beneath her, a bed of living kelp, impossibly gentle, and then of voices, crying, the sound of people weeping not from sorrow alone, but from the overwhelming relief of feeling anything at all. Thessaly's face appeared above her, tears streaming down her scaled cheeks. "You did it," the princess whispered. "We can feel again. My father, he's remembering my mother. He's remembering love." Lena tried to speak, but her throat was raw. Thessaly pressed something cool to her lips. Not the breathing organism, but water infused with healing properties. "Rest," Thessaly said gently. "You've earned it. And when you wake," she smiled, and it was genuine, warm, alive. "Someone very important is waiting to see you." They brought Lena back to the surface on the 7th day, carried by a procession of Tritons who sang as they swam, songs of grief and joy, loss and hope, all the emotions they'd rediscovered. King Thalasor led them himself, his face transformed by the weight of feeling, looking somehow both older and more alive. At the cove, Nerion waited. He'd recovered, the shallow water no longer toxic now that he'd been given permission to leave it, supplied with deep water currents channeled through the Triton's magic. He stood at the water's edge, his tail already shimmering with the return of health, his eyes fixed on the procession with desperate hope. When he saw Lena, his face crumpled. She looked different. The ordeal had changed her. Her hair had gone white at the temples where the power had burned through her. Her eyes held depths they hadn't before, carrying the weight of 3,000 years of borrowed memory. But she was alive. She was whole. She was smiling. Thalasor carried her into the shallows and placed her gently in Nerion's arms. The king looked at his son, really looked at him, and for the first time in millennia, there was recognition in his eyes, understanding. "Pride. I was wrong," Thalasor said, his voice rough with disuse of real emotion. "About beauty, about value, about what makes a soul worthy." He glanced at Lena, then back to Nerion. "She taught us that perfection is not the absence of flaws, but the courage to embrace them, to feel despite the pain, to love despite the risk of loss." He reached into his robes and produced a small object, a scale from his own tail, transformed through magic into something that pulsed with soft blue light. "This is my gift," the king said. "A piece of Atlantida's heart, freely given. Nerion, you are no longer exiled. You may return whenever you wish. But I suspect," he looked between his son and the human woman in his arms, "I suspect you have found a new home." "Father," Nerion said, and the word carried everything. Forgiveness, gratitude, goodbye. "Thank you." Thalasor nodded once, then turned back to the deep. The procession followed, their song fading slowly into the distance, until only the sound of waves remained. Lena and Nerion stayed in the shallows, holding each other, saying nothing, because no words existed for what they'd endured and survived. Finally, Nerion spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The curse breaking didn't just heal them. It healed the magic itself, the ocean's magic. And the ocean, it gave me a gift. a way to be with you without choosing between worlds. He held up the scale his father had given him. It pulsed once, twice, then dissolved into golden light that flowed over his tail. Before Lena's eyes, the scales separated, reformed, became legs, human legs, though they still shimmered with an iridescent quality, still bore the ghost of what they'd been. For half the year, Nerion explained, wonder in his voice, from the spring equinox to the autumn, I can walk on land, be human with you, and for the other half, I return to the sea and— He looked at her hopefully. If you wanted, you could come with me. The breathing organism is permanent now. You could live in both worlds, be citizens of the shore. Lena laughed, the sound bright and clear and free. Citizens of the shore. I like that. She kissed him then, tasting salt and possibility and the future unfolding before them like an endless horizon. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was rising over Villa Maresia, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Come on, Lena said, taking his hand, his fully human hand, still webbed between the fingers but warm and real in hers. I want to show you the lighthouse. And then, she smiled, then I want to introduce you to everyone as exactly what you are. Someone who saw me when no one else could. Someone worth diving into the deep for. They walked together from the water, and if people stared, at Nerion's strange grace, at Lena's white-streaked hair and the confidence in her stride, neither of them cared. They had survived the depths. They had healed a curse 3,000 years old. They had proven that love was worth any risk, any pain, any transformation. By the time they reached the lighthouse, word had spread. A crowd had gathered, Sophia and Marco and Isabella and half of Villa Maresia, all watching with varying expressions of shock and awe and curiosity. Lena climbed the steps to the lighthouse door, Nerion beside her, and turned to face them all. The sun was full above the horizon now, and in its light, she felt something she'd spent her entire life seeking. She felt seen, not for her body or her gift or her usefulness, but for the totality of who she was, flawed and brave and alive. This is Nerion, she announced, her voice carrying across the beach. And this lighthouse is going to become something new. A place for anyone who's ever felt invisible, who's been told they're not enough, who needs to remember that beauty isn't what you look like. It's what you are. She looked at Marco, standing beside Isabella with guilt written across his face. You're welcome here too, she said gently. Everyone is. Because the ocean taught me something. We all contain depths we haven't explored. We're all capable of transformation. We all deserve to be seen. Sophia was the first to approach, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around Lena, whispering apologies and celebrations in equal measure. Others followed. The boy whose leg Lena had healed, the old woman with arthritis, even some who had once whispered cruel words about her weight and worth. Lena welcomed them all, because that was what healing meant. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not the absence of pain, but the courage to feel it and grow beyond it. As the crowd dispersed and the day stretched toward afternoon, Nerion pulled Lena close, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked out at the endless ocean. What are you thinking? He asked. Lena smiled, watching the waves catch the light, eternal and ever-changing. I'm thinking that I used to believe my story would be about being saved, about someone seeing me and making me whole. She turned in his arms, meeting his storm-gray eyes. But it wasn't. It was about learning to see myself, about diving into the deep not to escape, but to discover what I carried inside all along. And what was that? Light, Lena said simply. Enough light to heal kingdoms. Enough light to transform curses. Enough light, she kissed him softly, to illuminate the space between two worlds and make it home. The tide came in and went out and came in again. Eternal rhythm of the ocean that cared nothing for human concepts of beauty or worth. But in the lighthouse above the shore, two citizens of that in-between space stood together, proof that love could bridge any divide, that the truest magic wasn't transformation, but acceptance, that beauty wasn't what you became, but what you'd always been, just waiting for the courage to surface.